Airports are places of transition. You arrive, you wait, you leave. Millions of people move through them every day without incident, trusting the machinery around them, trusting the systems, trusting the ground beneath their feet. But airports are also places where jet engines spin at brutal speeds, where propeller blades turn in the dark, where the wrong person can walk through a door carrying something terrible. The margin between an ordinary day and a catastrophic one is thinner than most travelers ever stop to consider. These are not freak events pulled from distant history. They are recent, they are documented, and in almost every case, something could have gone differently. Here are the 5 most terrifying airport deaths ever recorded. It was the last afternoon of 2022. The sky over Montgomery, Alabama was clear and cold, and American Eagle Flight 3408 had just touched down after an uneventful run from Dallas-Fort Worth. The Embraer ERJ-175, registration N264NN, taxied to its assigned gate at Montgomery Regional Airport with 59 passengers and 4 crew aboard. None of them would be harmed. The person who would not survive the next few minutes was standing on the ground, waiting for the plane to stop. Courtney Edwards was 34 years old. She worked as a ramp agent for Piedmont Airlines, an American Airlines subsidiary responsible for ground support at the airport. She had been on the job at Montgomery Regional since November 2021, trained on jet blast zones, ingestion zones, and the precise protocols that keep ground crew alive around powered aircraft. She completed recurrent safety training just 3 months before that afternoon. The flight arrived with a mechanical complication. The plane's auxiliary power unit was inoperative, which meant the pilots needed to keep the number 1 engine, the left engine, running until ground power could be connected. This was not unusual. It was a listed minimum equipment item. The crew knew it. The ground crew knew it too because they had been told directly. About 10 minutes before the plane arrived at the gate, the ramp team held a safety briefing. Then, just before the aircraft pulled in, they held a second briefing, a huddle, specifically to repeat the warning. The engines would stay running until ground power was connected. No one was to approach the aircraft until the engines spooled down and the red beacon lights went dark. Surveillance video captured what happened next. Edwards walked toward the tail of the plane to place a safety cone. As she moved into the jet blast area directly behind the number 1 engine, she stumbled. The lead ramp agent saw her near the tail and yelled. He waved at her to move back. She began to move away from the aircraft. He turned to connect the ground power cord. Then he heard a bang. The left engine had shut down. In the cockpit, the captain felt the plane shake violently and saw a failure symbol on his engine display. He shut off both batteries and left the flight deck to investigate. What he found confirmed the worst. Edwards had walked along the leading edge of the left wing, moved toward the fuselage, and stepped directly in front of the number 1 engine. The red beacon light was still on. The engine was still spinning. Surveillance video showed her left leg drifting back toward the inlet, her right leg lifting from the ground, her torso entering the engine. It was over in a fraction of a second. The NTSB investigation took 2 years. The final report, published in December 2024, identified the probable cause as cognitive impairment. Edwards had relapsing-remitting multiple sclerosis, a condition that can affect executive functioning and working memory. She also had diabetes treated with insulin. Toxicology results detected delta-9 THC in her blood at the time of death, indicating she had used a cannabis product before her shift. The NTSB was careful to note that blood concentration of THC does not directly predict impairment, and the exact contribution of each factor could not be determined. What the report made clear was this: every warning available to her was active. The beacon was on. The engine was audible even through ear protection. She had encountered the jet blast herself just moments before. Her training covered this exact scenario. And still, for reasons that remain only partially understood, she walked in front of a running jet engine. The American Eagle Ground Operations Manual specified that ramp personnel were required to stay 15 feet from a running engine. That boundary was almost twice the manufacturer's own stated inlet hazard area of 8.3 feet. There were protocols layered on top of protocols, briefings stacked on top of briefings, and a lead agent who tried physically to wave her back. None of it was enough. She left behind 3 children. It was the night of September 2, 2017, in the maintenance area of Terminal A at Newark Liberty International Airport. The tarmac was dark. Planes cycled through gates as they always did, and ground crews moved between aircraft in the kind of controlled rhythm that makes the work look routine from a distance. Up close, it never is. Jacqueline Mkalama was 53 years old. She lived in Orange, New Jersey, and her job was cleaning aircraft between flights. That means moving fast, crossing open apron ground, getting from one plane to the next before the turnaround window closes. She had done it enough times that it had become second nature. Her union remembered her as someone who understood the dangers of the work and pushed for safer conditions for everyone around her, not just herself. She knew what the tarmac could cost a person. That night, a Bombardier DHC-8-202 turboprop sat parked at Gate 25. A crew of mechanics from Commute Air, operating as a United Airlines subsidiary, was up in the cockpit, working through a maintenance task. According to the lawsuit later filed by Mkalama's family, they had been cleaning fuel filters and were nearly done. To finish the job, they needed to return fuel to the engines. That meant starting the propellers. Before doing that, someone was supposed to be standing on the ground below, watching the surrounding area, ready to warn anyone who came near. A designated spotter. A basic safeguard. That spotter was sitting in his car. Mkalama was on the apron, walking from the rear of the aircraft toward the front. She was crossing through the arc of the propeller. At night, a spinning turboprop propeller does not look like a blade. It does not blur or shimmer in a way the eye can register. It becomes a disk of moving air, invisible against the dark, turning fast enough that a person standing at the wrong angle would see nothing at all before it reached them. The blade caught her in the head. One of the mechanics felt the vibration instantly and cut the engine. He came down from the cockpit and found Mkalama on the ground, unconscious. She was still breathing. Emergency medical personnel reached her, stabilized her on the apron, and transported her to University Hospital in Newark. She did not recover. She was gone before her family had time to understand what had happened. The family filed suit in New York in 2018. A New York appellate court ruled the case belonged in New Jersey, and it was refiled there in August 2020. The defendants named included the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, United Airlines, Commute Air, Champlain Enterprises, and Prime Flight Aviation Services. The suit alleged that the Port Authority had failed to provide safe working conditions, that the area lacked adequate alarms and lighting, and that the mechanics had started the propellers without confirming the ground below was clear. The family's attorney, Joseph Monaco, described the situation without softening it. The propellers were invisible in the dark. Mkalama was doing her job. The man who was supposed to be standing watch was not there. Every layer of protection that existed between Mkalama and those spinning blades depended on one person being in one specific place, and that person made a different choice. What stays with this case is how ordinary the failure was. No technical malfunction, no equipment breakdown, no split-second cascading error. A spotter left his post. The propellers started. A woman who had spent years working in the shadow of aircraft, who knew the risks and advocated against them, walked into a blade she had no way of seeing. The procedure existed. The role existed. The training existed. On that particular night in that particular maintenance area, the person responsible for standing between the work and the danger simply was not there. It was a Friday morning, November 1st, 2013, at Los Angeles International Airport. Terminal 3 was moving the way a major airport moves at the start of a long weekend. Lines at the TSA checkpoints, travelers dragging bags, the low friction of people who would rather be somewhere else. At around 9:18 in the morning, a 23-year-old man named Paul Anthony Chiancia walked through the terminal doors carrying a bag. Inside the bag was a semi-automatic Smith & Wesson M&P 15 rifle, chambered in .223 caliber, 5 30-round magazines, and hundreds of additional rounds. Also in the bag was a handwritten note. It said he wanted to kill TSA officers. It called them traitors. It said he wanted to instill fear into their minds. Ciancia walked up to the TSA checkpoint and pulled the rifle from the bag. He shot TSA officer Gerardo Hernandez in the chest at point-blank range. Then he walked away, went up an escalator, came back down, and shot Hernandez again after seeing him move. Hernandez was 39 years old. He had immigrated to the United States from El Salvador at age 15 and had worked for the TSA since the agency's early years as a behavior detection officer. He was the first TSA officer in the agency's history to be killed in the line of duty. According to the autopsy, he was shot 12 times. His heart was grazed. His bladder and intestines were pierced. More than 40 bullet fragments were removed from his body. He was dead within 2 to 5 minutes of being shot. Ciancia kept moving. He went up the escalator into the secure side of the terminal, continuing to fire. He wounded 2 more TSA agents and a civilian passenger, a schoolteacher from Illinois. People ran in every direction, sprinting down escalators, cramming into bathrooms, pressing into restaurant spaces where staff locked the metal security doors. Witnesses described a man walking, not running, down the terminal concourse, stopping to ask people if they were TSA agents, moving on when they said no. Airport police confronted Ciancia at the food court at the far end of the terminal. He was shot 4 times and taken into custody, then transported to Ronald Reagan UCLA Medical Center in critical condition. While this was happening, Hernandez was bleeding on the terminal floor, roughly 20 feet from an exit. Police were uncertain whether it was safe for paramedics to enter. He did not receive medical attention for 33 minutes after being shot. By then, it did not matter. The shooting disrupted more than 165,000 passengers on hundreds of flights. Terminals 1, 2, and 3 were shut down. The FAA grounded all outbound flights. Passengers were evacuated and rescreened. Ciancia pleaded guilty in 2016 and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus 60 years. As of 2025, he is held at the United States Penitentiary in Atwater, California. The note in his bag pulled from conspiracy material, with references to fiat currency, the New World Order, and a targeted hatred for the agency he had walked in to destroy. In the days before the attack, he had sent angry, rambling texts to his family in New Jersey. They were worried enough to contact police. Officers went to his residence. He was not home. No report could be filed. Ciancia had told a roommate he needed a ride to the airport immediately on the morning of the shooting. The roommate, sensing nothing wrong, drove him there. There was one more detail that stayed with investigators and reporters long after the sentencing. Gerardo Hernandez would have turned 40 the following week. His widow described him as a wonderful husband, father, brother, son, and friend. She said she was truly devastated. Those were among the few words anyone close to him could find. It was just before 1 in the afternoon on January 6, 2017. The baggage claim area of Terminal 2 at Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport was packed with travelers who had just landed. Delta Airlines and Air Canada both operated out of that terminal, and the carousels were ringed with people waiting on luggage, checking phones, making plans. Many of them were older. Most were heading to the port to board a cruise. It was the kind of crowd that fills the least secured corner of any airport. No checkpoints, no screening, just open space and rotating belts, and people who believed the hard part of the journey was already behind them. Esteban Santiago was 26 years old. He had flown in from Alaska that morning, connecting through Minneapolis. His only checked bag was a locked, hard-sided container holding a Walther PPS 90mm semi-automatic pistol and 2 loaded magazines. He had declared the firearm at check-in and followed TSA protocols exactly. Everything he did was legal, documented, and unremarkable. After landing, he collected his bag from the carousel, walked to a bathroom, loaded the gun, and came back out. He shot the first people he encountered. The attack ran between 70 and 80 seconds. Santiago fired 15 rounds. 5 people were killed. 6 were wounded by gunfire. About 36 more were hurt in the panic that tore through the terminal as people ran. fell and trampled each other trying to get out. A Broward County Sheriff's deputy who had been trained for exactly this kind of response ran toward the shooting and had Santiago face down on the ground within 85 seconds of the first shots. The deputy later said he was simply doing what he had been trained to do. The following year, the Florida Sheriff's Association named him Deputy of the Year. A federal judge, sentencing Santiago in 2018, called it 85 seconds of evil. Santiago received 5 consecutive life terms, plus 120 years in prison. All 5 of the people who were killed that afternoon had been passing through Fort Lauderdale to begin cruises. None of them knew each other. They shared nothing except the timing of their travel and the carousel they had gathered around. They had landed, expecting the next chapter of a vacation, not the last moments of their lives. What made the case harder to sit with was how clearly the warning signs had mounted in the months before the shooting. Santiago had served in Iraq as a combat engineer from 2010 to 2011. His family said afterward that he came back different, that something had broken loose inside him after his time overseas. He was discharged from the Alaska National Guard in August 2016 for unsatisfactory performance. That same year, he was arrested in Anchorage for assaulting his girlfriend. In November 2016, he walked into the FBI's field office and told agents the government was controlling his mind, that the CIA was forcing him to consume ISIS propaganda, that voices were directing him toward violence. The FBI referred him for a mental health evaluation. Local police took his handgun. 20 days later, because he had not been formally committed or convicted of a disqualifying crime, they returned it. In December 2016, he got the gun back. On January 6, 2017, he carried it onto a plane. Investigators found no connection to any terrorist organization and no clear explanation for why he chose Fort Lauderdale specifically. What they found was a paper trail of intervention after intervention, each one technically correct and collectively useless. The baggage claim area has no metal detectors. It has no screening of any kind. It is the place where the airport's security architecture ends and the public world begins. Santiago had moved through every official checkpoint without triggering a single alarm, because he had done nothing wrong, legally speaking, until the moment he pulled the gun out in a bathroom and walked back into the crowd. It was March 2019 at Indira Gandhi International Airport in New Delhi. The terminal was running at full capacity, the way it always does. Thousands of passengers pressing through corridors, dragging luggage toward gates, moving between levels without a second thought about what holds the building together beneath their feet. A 40-year-old man stepped onto an escalator. The emergency brake system failed to engage. He fell approximately 20 feet and suffered severe head trauma on impact. Airport staff responded immediately. The crowds around him froze, then moved. None of it was fast enough. He was gone. What the investigation uncovered was not a sudden mechanical failure, the kind that gives no warning and offers no blame. It was something slower and more avoidable than that. The escalator had not been inspected on schedule. The maintenance records had gaps. The emergency systems designed to catch exactly this kind of failure had not been tested as required. The machine had been deteriorating in plain sight, used by tens of thousands of people every day, certified to carry them safely, and left to quietly fall apart between the intervals when anyone bothered to check. This case sits apart from the others on this list, and that distance is worth holding on to for a moment. Courtney Edwards walked into a running jet engine despite 2 safety briefings and a lead agent physically waving her back. Jacqueline Mkalama was struck by an invisible propeller blade because a spotter abandoned his post. Gerardo Hernandez was shot by a man who had announced his intentions in a handwritten note he carried through the terminal. The 5 people at Fort Lauderdale were killed by a shooter whose mental collapse had been documented by law enforcement, the military, and the FBI in the months leading up to the attack. Every one of those deaths had an identifiable human failure at its center. A boundary crossed, a post abandoned, a warning ignored, a weapon returned. The failure was visible if you knew where to look. The Delhi escalator offers no such fixed point. The man who stepped onto it had no reason to hesitate. There was no warning light, no briefing, no procedure he failed to follow. He did what everyone in that terminal did dozens of times a day without incident. The The failure was bureaucratic and gradual, buried in maintenance logs and inspection schedules, invisible to anyone riding the escalator and invisible to the man responsible for signing off on its condition. Airports are built on layered trust. Passengers trust that the gate will open, that the walkway bridge will hold, that the escalator carrying them between levels has been maintained by someone whose job it is to know whether it's safe. When that trust is betrayed by neglect rather than violence or catastrophic error, the result looks almost indistinguishable from an ordinary accident. Almost. The investigation prompted review of escalator maintenance standards across Indian airports. Recommendations followed. Whether those changes came in time for anyone who needed them before March 2019 is a different question, and one without a satisfying answer. The man who fell that morning was simply traveling. He was in a place built to move people safely between floors, and it failed him without warning, without drama, and without the kind of obvious preceding breakdown that allows anyone to say clearly where the line between acceptable and unacceptable risk was finally crossed. The Delhi airport's operator confirmed afterward that the escalator had been due for service. Maintenance contracts at facilities of that scale rotate on tight schedules, with each unit pulled out of operation for inspection on a calendar most travelers never see. The unit that failed had been scheduled, signed for, and recorded as compliant in the logs that fed the airport's safety reporting system. What had not happened, according to the post-incident review, was the actual physical work. Documentation existed for an inspection that had not been performed in the way the records described. A gap between paper and reality is the kind of failure that often goes unnoticed for years inside large transportation systems. In this case, it surfaced the only way it ever does. A man stepped onto a moving handrail. The mechanism beneath did not hold. By the time the deficiency was traced to its specific document and signature, the person who had ridden that escalator was already gone. Airports process billions of passengers every year, and most of them arrive without incident. But the cases here show what happens when the systems underneath that safety record begin to crack, whether through a ramp agent walking into a running engine despite every warning, a spotter choosing to sit in his car, a gunman who cleared every legal checkpoint, or a maintenance log no one updated. The infrastructure, the protocols, the people assigned to enforce them. When any one piece fails, the consequences land on whoever happens to be standing in the wrong place at the wrong moment. These 5 cases make that plain.